How much money do you need to have to be considered wealthy? Back before I was born, and even in the early 2000s, in fact the year 2000, being a crorepati was considered the benchmark. It was something that India aspired to. And that's why Kaun Banega Crorepati, which was launched in 2000, was such a big hit, and why it captured the imagination of the populace. Now, 1 crore may not be what it once was, but it is still a major landmark and a major milestone in the journey to building wealth. It is also a significant bottleneck though. But even if it sounds daunting now, once you have pushed through that bottleneck, the journey beyond is so much easier. I'm Mathew, and on this episode of Moneywise, I like to talk to you about what it takes to build that 1 crore and how you should reach that quickly, but without taking undue risk. Join me today is Shalini Sekhri, the Chief Growth Officer at Realism Investment Managers. Thank you so much, Shalini, for taking the time as always.
Thanks, as always. Great to be here, Alex.
So let's talk about that magical number, 1 crore, crorepati. It's etched indelibly in the minds of so many people, and it's something that they aspire to. Why is it so magical?
So, Alex, I'd like to start by saying that the 1 crore number is so much more than just a financial milestone. It, in fact, is almost like a gateway to a world of possibilities. So think of that first journey to 1 crore as opening a door. And once you step through it, the path to even greater wealth becomes far more accessible. So why 1 crore? It's not a number that's been plucked for thin air, right? So the relevance of 1 crore is that for so many of us, maybe the salaried class, maybe this large middle income India, 1 crore represents a number that can, in a very meaningful way, change your life. It could mean securing your financial future. It could mean not just living, but living well currently. And it could mean achieving all of your dreams. So that's why it's a really meaningful number. Now, it's not something that you just put down on a piece of paper and say that, here it is and my job is done. It requires a lot of work to be able to be extremely thoughtful about what is your lifestyle, what is it that you want to aspire, and what is the life that you want to live. And once you know that, to be able to align these financial goals with your life's aspirations makes it a far more meaningful journey. Rest assured, it's going to be a tough journey. And to be able to have the motivation of what lies at the end of this can prove to keep you, on the path even when the going gets tough.
So I want to establish this right at the start, Shalini, because a lot of people would define being a crorepati very differently, right? Because, and we've spoken about this on the show as well, a lot of people tend to move towards purchasing a house at a certain stage, which is a very important life goal and aspiration. Invariably, in large cities now, houses are not available for less than 2 crores. So they start and they purchase that, they're paying an EMI, and invariably over the course of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, they have acquired this house, they have likely paid back this house, but a large portion of their wealth is locked in this asset that is not liquid, and they would not want to move out of it. Are they still considered crorepatis? Have they still acquired that wealth? How would you look at it?
So fixed assets, especially ones that you would not monetize, I don't know a lot of people, especially in India, who would sell the house that they live in unless they really fall on bad times. And therefore, to our mind as an investment professional, I would say the house that you live in is not an investment. So yes, it's part of your net worth, but unless you have liquid assets which can be monetized when you need them, I would say that that would not be the right benchmark to say that you now have the money available to you to do everything that you want. So for example, if you want to travel, you may have a beautiful house, but not enough money to, maybe go on that cruise. So somewhere I believe that the house that you live in should not be considered as really your investments or your wealth, which is available to you to pursue your dreams.
Okay. So let's talk about the journey to that 1 crore mark, because a lot of people, now that they are accessing content like this and they are speaking about building wealth much earlier, they have access to so much more in the way of avenues to build growth, investments, that they're starting earlier than a lot of us did. So from that perspective, how do you go about starting this process of building 1 crore?
Like you said, Alex, it's quite a daunting thought when you're starting out as a youngster, maybe 23, 24 years old. You're making maybe at best 1 lakh a month as salary. That's a big number, right? So I'm saying let's assume that's where you're starting out after your first few years of internship. It seems like a long ways off, but there are certain basic principles you have to start with, I think, which will put you on this path and make it far less daunting. So I would start by saying start early. I cannot emphasize that enough. Time is truly your ally as you're building, your financial wealth. So that's number one. The second thing is to have very clear goals, because this in a way becomes your guiding star, your north pole towards which everything you do should move towards. Thirdly, live below your means. And I would say not within, but below. And once you have these savings, invest wisely. Lastly, try and create multiple streams of income. So for example, your investments themselves become income besides your regular salary, right? So these are the basic principles. There are few things you need to think of in terms of financial discipline.
Yes.
You mentioned some of them. So obviously you need to budget. It cannot be, a Bhagwan Bharose number, what am I going to save? You need to know what your post-tax income is and budget from that. You need to know how your savings are going to come about. Thirdly, you need to plan for your loan repayments, which are generally quite a large part. If you have taken a car loan.
Are there rules that govern this?
Yes, so we'll come to how to really split, your post-tax income. Then, of course, you also have to plan for your taxes, because today, when you're compliant, you do have to give some money back to the government. And lastly, you should also plan for an emergency fund. So all of these financial guidelines kind of, take you towards this. There is a broad thumb rule of budgeting. To keep it very simple, I would call it the 50-30-20 rule. It differs. I mean, some people would be able to save much more. Some people are struggling to make ends meet. But what the 50-30-20 rule says is that 50% of your income would go towards necessities, which would include your rent or EMI, depends whether you're in a rented accommodation or not. 30% could be for
your
wants.
Lifestyle expenses.
Right, so needs are your basics which you have to take care of. 30% are wants. You have to live a little, you're only young once. It's so important to also enjoy the journey. So we're not talking about a very frugal lifestyle. You must enjoy your money as well. And the last 20% should be kept for savings. So I would say this is a lot of tweaks possible, but this is a good simple rule, because firstly, you don't need a complicated Excel sheet to execute this. You don't need any financial advisor to execute this. You can, compute this yourself.
And that's the bare minimum that you can do. You can, of course, do more.
Yes, so many people can save a lot more. Many people would find even this number daunting. Maybe as their salary increases, over time, they may be able to get there. Perhaps today it's not possible. But as they say, it's never too late to start. So perhaps at the initial years of your career, it may be a stretch, but as you move ahead, do this. I also know a lot of people who work backwards. They're so motivated to their end goals that they decide how much they want to save. They subtract that from their income, and what's left is all they allow themselves to spend.
Wow.
So that's a highly disciplined, committed way to your future goal. So it's all about the motivation, what it is that you're trying to achieve, and how you stay on the course.
So you mentioned 1 lakh, but I know a lot of people that are sub 25 that are much, much lower than that. So we're talking about 5, 6, 7 lakhs even. People are starting with that. Of course, they do grow into that 10 lakh, 12 lakh bracket, but it takes a good 5-7 years for them to get to that point, which is not to say that they can't start, right? So are there any calculations that you've made that may, lay out this journey that they can take up for them to reach this 1 crore mark?
So Alex, I'll start by saying that there are 3 main parameters around which, this journey to 1 crore wealth creation begins, right? So one is, how many years do you have to accumulate this wealth? Whether you're starting at 25 or 45 makes a great difference,
right,
to this outcome. Secondly, how much are you able to save? So whether you invest 20,000 a month or 50,000 a month, for example, would also make a great difference to the final outcome. Yeah. And lastly, what is the return on your portfolio? So whether you're starting with a, initial saving of 5,000, whatever that number might be, maybe try and use the 50-30-20 rule. So if your salary is not 1 lakh a month, it's 50,000, you can still apply the rule and you would still have, say, a 10,000 rupee SIP to start with. So somewhere I think that journey must be begun. And if one is disciplined and carve aside that saving right at the start of the month, rather than it being a byproduct, okay, now the month is over, what do I have left? I think you can start on the journey irrespective of what your salary is. So that's what I genuinely believe. And eventually, as you tweak each of these metrics, you will see how the journey becomes quicker and quicker. So I'll take an example. Say I'm investing 20,000 rupees a month as an SIP. I do nothing with it. It's lying in a bank locker under my mattress. It'll take me a whopping 42 years to get to 1 crore, well past retirement age.
Right.
If I were to tweak one parameter, that okay, it's not lying under my mattress, I'm earning, say, 12% return through a simple mutual fund SIP.
Which is reasonable.
Which is very reasonable. Equity has given 14% return in the last 20 years. I find that number from 42 years comes down to a very doable 16 years. If I tweak the third parameter, how much am I investing? Say 20,000 goes to 50,000 a month. That 16 years comes down to 10 years.
And it's not incremented. It's 50,000 straight over.
So I'm not even talking about stepping up your investment. Now, coming back to your point, suppose initially my salary was much lower. I was starting with much less. There is a concept of, say, a step-up SIP.
Yes.
Right? Which basically says that if you invest 20,000 and stick with 20,000 for, say, 16 years, you'll get to 1 crore at 12%. Even if you increase that slightly, let's say you're doing well, you start getting, a jump, a promotion, an incentive, increment, and you take that up by, say, 10% every year. So you start with 20,000, you take it up by about 10%. You'll find that 16-year journey has come down to a 13.2 year or something like that, which means that all the money that you're getting by way of, say, an increment should not just go into increasing your lifestyle, equally should be, channeled towards increasing your SIP. So even these small tweaks, no matter what salary you're starting with, will eventually get you there. Slightly slower or slightly quicker, but if you're able to stay these courses, use these very, very simple guidelines, you will certainly get there.
But it's still a considerable amount of time, Shalini. We're talking about 13 years, even if you've started at 20,000 rupees and you've incremented it by 10% per year, and we're assuming 12%. Of course, we've gotten more than that in the past, but there's nothing to assume that we will get that in the future. So it's going to be a considerable amount of time. Now, having said that, I want to understand why it is so important to hit that mark and how quickly things can escalate going forward.
Sure. So this is what we call the magic of compounding, Alex. We all know about it in theory, but I'm very keen to explain it through, again, another very simple rule. I'm all about rules today. So we call this the 8-4-3 rule. So one is, of course, start early. Just to take our example, even at 25, if you started this journey, even with 16 years of getting to 1 crore, you're still only 41 years old. So it seems like a considerable time, but at the end of the day, you still have almost perhaps 20 years of a earning life ahead of you, and you've already hit the 1 crore mark. Now, coming to the power of compounding, what the 8-4-3 rule says is that once you start investing, say, at 12% return, let's keep the same example, it takes about 8 years to double your money.
Sure.
The same amount which has taken you 8 years to create, it'll take you only 4 more years to create the same amount.
With the amount that you've accumulated.
Which you've already accumulated. Right. And the further doubling happens in only 3 more years.
Right.
Right? So basically, again, coming back to our 1 crore example, say I do a 21,000 rupee SIP every month. At the end of 8 years, this amount will be about 33 lakhs. It'll only take me 4 more years to do the next 33 lakhs and another 3 years to do the next 33 lakhs.
Right.
So by the time I'm 15, 16 years through the journey, I have accumulated this 1 crore.
1 crore.
Let's assume now I take early retirement. I don't want to slog it out anymore. Even if I do nothing to further add to this corpus, 1 crore in 6 odd years becomes 2 crores.
Yeah. Rule of 72.
Yes. And if I don't do anything and don't touch it, in another 5 years, it would have doubled to 4 crores. So same example, start at 25. By 51, I'm now sitting on 4 crores. So the power of compounding says not only am I earning on my initial capital, I'm also earning on the return. And as the amount gets more and more scalable, you'll find that it becomes a snowball effect. So the first 8 years is slowish growth, but steady. The next 4 years, it accelerates. And by the final 3 years, you have the snowball effect. So I think that is really the power of compounding and starting early. I think everyone can think about retiring at 41 in case they follow this rule. Just think about it, 4 crores, even if it gives you a 10% return, you have a 40 lakh income every year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the beauty is that if there are periods of significant outperformance that can give you a leg up as well. Sure. Like we've seen over the last 5 years, we've seen a tremendous journey in the equity markets, which has resulted in wealth creation for a lot of people. Now, it goes without saying, therefore, Shalini, that if you get a leg up, if, for example, like my dad, he wished that I would do a certain educational course, and I decided I'm the black sheep of the family, so I decided not to. And 5 years back, he said, look, I wish that you would have done this, but since you didn't, I'm just giving you the money, you do what you want with it. And thankfully, I decided to invest it. Now, if you do get a leg up, it's a significant benefit if you use it right.
Sure,
right?
You could receive an inheritance, you could receive a large bonus in a good year, some of your shares did well, you cashed out, you could be a business person, you've had a particularly good year. So there are a lot of these instances where, you're able to add significantly to your kitty, and then you have even more time and even more money on which to compound. So somewhere I think the strategies and the habits that you inculcate in this journey become second nature, Alex. And money gets money. So once you've pushed through that first 1 crore benchmark, as you talked about, it might seem a little daunting at first, but once you step through that door, so to speak, you just kind of take off and you just accelerate to even greater wealth. So I think that is the magic of this 1 crore number.
So the thing is that when people look to achieve this mark, it is so, it's so beguiling, it's so aspirational, it's so interesting to have, and you dream about this moment, you want to reach there faster. And so unfortunately, people tend to take on too much risk. How do you go about identifying how much is okay? Because a lot of people tell you that investing in small caps is great for you if you are early on. In your example, if you were 25, and if you're talking about building wealth over 15, 16 years, you don't need to touch that now. So you could potentially have tremendous growth, but some people take on too much risk. So how do you justify that?
So one is the principle of asset allocation is also really important. So if you think of the main broad categories, say equity, debt, real estate, and gold, right? It's so important to have a balanced portfolio, to have some of those assets in your portfolio, no matter what stage of life you're at. A lot of these asset classes have a very low correlation to each other, which means no matter what the market cycle is, some pocket of your investments will perform. And this is important because, there are certain market cycles where, say, for long periods of time, equity may not do well. Yeah. And perhaps it's the real estate part of your portfolio or, maybe the gold. Gold has been such a surprising asset class. You never thought about it seriously, but, it's been doing great things. So
25% so far this year, approximately.
Amazing, right? Otherwise, you just think inflation beating or just helping us keep up with inflation. So all these asset classes have very different cycles and very often not correlated to each other. So that's very important for a portfolio construction. Now, at different life stages, obviously, of our life, our ability to take on risk changes drastically, right? Affected by a few things. What is our income? Is it stable income, or are you like a gig worker or, a freelancer? Secondly, what are my expenses? Thirdly, what are my responsibilities? When you're young and single, it's just all about you. Then you get married, you have kids, their education, older parents. So that as well determines how you're able to invest. The other thing is age. And lastly, I would say market dynamics, because at all points of time, markets throw you curveballs. So, you do need to readjust. So the broad thumb rule for asset allocation, which is where really risk gets mitigated, is, again, a rule of 100 is a very standard thought, which says that 100 minus your age is how much you should have in riskier assets.
Okay.
So, for example, in equity, you could have various types of equity, say direct equity, you could have, that is, you're buying stocks, right. You could have equity mutual funds, private equity, international equity. Then you have the whole debt bucket, which would range all the way from, say, FDs to PPF to debt mutual funds, InvITs, REITs, the range is immense. You have real estate, again, through a fund, or you buy a physical apartment or a shop on rent, you give out on rent. or a piece of land. And lastly, gold, which you might buy an ETF or a coin or, jewelry for your wife. All of this.
Husband.
Or husband, yes. So all of this can go potentially into a portfolio. So as you can see, individuals have a very wide spectrum through which they can construct a portfolio. The riskier assets would perhaps give you somewhere from 12 to 15%. Your fixed income can give you anywhere from 5 to 10%. And accordingly, real estate, gold would also be, in that 8 to 10% range. So it's not just equity, for example, which is the path. Like you rightly said, if I was 25 years old, the rule of 100 says that I can have 75% in risk assets and 25% in safer stuff. And that reverses. By the time I'm 75, I would have, only 25 in riskier assets.
But the pool is much larger.
By then you have a lot more money. So, say on 4 crores, you're getting, forget 12%, which you're expecting from equity, even a blended return of, say, about 9 to 10%, you still have a, good quality of life and, enough money coming in. So taking on undue risk, I think, is a problem. In fact, as we were discussing, Alex, to our mind, what we learned conventionally in school and college, that higher the risk, higher the return, we think of it as a straight line.
Yeah.
It really isn't, because after a point, there is an undue amount of risk that creeps into a portfolio, either by taking only small cap funds, because that's in favor of micro cap funds, or you buy really risky stocks. Now, what could happen is it all does well for short periods of time, but since we're here for the long game, at some point when markets turn, you can see a significant loss of capital.
The bottom falls out.
The bottom falls out, you cannot catch it however good you are. So which means not only have you lost return, you've also lost your principal. So to our mind, risk return is more like a bell curve when you're investing, which means that the path to high returns is not very high risk, it's moderate risk. Because that very high risk comes back to bite you in ways and at times that you least expect it, eroding even your capital.
So it's not a, it's
not a linear,
it's not a linear progression.
Trending.
There is a reversion to the mean.
There is. And once your capital starts to erode, then all the good work you've done over the years gets undone and can set you back by many years. And then time is not on your side, so you can't always catch up. So it's very important to have the long game in mind, like I keep saying. Think about not 1 year, 2 years, what's happening now. Don't watch the news as much. Don't get carried away by what other people are doing.
Don't say that.
But, jokes apart, I think it's very important to stay disciplined and not get carried away that this is what everyone's doing, this is what's sounding really cool, easy money. How many direct equity investors do you talk to who will tell you about only their success stories? And rest assured, having met many of them in my career, I would say for every success, there would be at least 2 stocks that they've lost tremendous amounts of money on, which they're not really talking about.
And so it balances out.
So eventually, it's like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And when you're trying to create a long-term wealth journey, that can be pretty counterproductive. So just consuming risk in the hope that it plays out, again, I would say can be extremely counterproductive to this 1 crore journey for sure.
So we've spoken about this magical 1 crore number, and we've also spoken about the fact that it can multiply very quickly, and so reaching that threshold as early as possible is beneficial. But more and more nowadays, people are talking about this whole FIRE strategy, the retire early and live life and, maybe go to a beach destination somewhere and kick back. How realistic is that? And you're a financial planner, you speak to a lot of people. I'm guessing people that you speak to would have more of these desires. Is that really workable?
I think a lot of people today are thinking about, pursuing their passion projects, maybe living the life that their jobs don't allow them to do, right? So while all of us have been told that follow a career that you love and then it's not work, I think the more practical perspective is that you also have to work to earn a living, and it may not absolutely be the thing that you love. So today there are more and more people who are prioritizing what they want to do with their lives, with their time, what they truly enjoy. And that might perhaps only happen once their current day jobs come to an end. So which is why this FIRE movement is something that, we hear a lot about, which is financial independence, retire early. That's the acronym. It's an extremely difficult way of life, because here what we're saying is that where you would normally perhaps retire at 65, and maybe therefore you would have had 40 years to build your retirement kitty, Here, if you choose to, say, retire at 40, you have 15 years to build that kitty.
A significant milestone, of course, is that 1 crore mark. Shalini,
Yes, absolutely.
thank you so much for joining in and for speaking to us on Moneywise. And, well, here's my wish to you. I hope that you accumulate this 1 crore very quickly and you have the option of sipping coconut juice or kawa in the hills, whatever you like, earlier than maybe some other people in years gone by have achieved to do. Thanks so much for watching. Do stay tuned. This is NDTV Profit.